Ah, so we meet again, Sir Pensrow. On the field of battle and conquest for Highlander. I joke because he's my Sherpa around here. He's my Scully Bone guy around here to teach me how to get it done, so.
Real pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Roger Penrose.
We're doing it again.
Who
Back to the stone mill.
Need introduction. However, I'm not sure if everybody is aware of Roger's.
Well, you could take my STEM classes from early pandemic phase where I'm actually talking about hypervigilance, what is direct physics. You know, when we're talking about those standard models in here, it's a twister theory. It's gonna look like a 200-mile-an-hour 2x4 test happen inside of here.
Be careful on some mathematical assumptions we make. We often assume that manifolds are analytic.
Let's hold that back for a moment. For some of you who may not fully understand what's contained in this brown book right here.
How to solve the problem of infinitely many overlapping loops, and he told me just assume the analysis.
We'll start with the beginning, because I'm going to show you, like I start my 45 minutes of fame here.
Long time ago,
what happens in fundamental analysis when you're dealing with what twister or what system?
There was a twister session there. I was
what twister
young, very
inside of here for fundamental analysis.
Roger was my
we have spin mass
several
direction as a standard hole from Fermilab. We have a graduated cylinder experiment, a ball and air, ball and water, ball and fluoromonium, with a bunch of math about it. Using Aristotelian's physics, we learned that there is one great paradox that plagues the physics of motion, of alpha. Inside here, this becomes a supercritical experiment to describing who alpha is mathematically, right, Airborne?
And when he was finished, I realized
inside here,
took him 1 hour.
the game for what this does says clink, ball. Okay, that ball of that composition is the best spin motion direction for what we're going to need. So let's continue. Let's continue here. Here we're going to get into the Hadron Collider for what it is, the photon, the apple, and the Hadron Collider for a drop in the Hawking's radiation and lensing paradoxes of some of the nature of the NTF beginning here, or NTF end. Here we got the NF beginning, NF end, CMB, first star in today, Sophie, inside of the ramp up on figuring out what those houses are, just to figure out where we are, when, what is, or what's comparatively gravity to 9.8 meters per second, right? FMA. We're going to use those frames, dimensional analysis. Let's look at the columns and sections, the magnetism, housings, and some of the land briefs on this, the paper works that kind of work on that twister theory angle a little bit. Where's the bob wire? What's the system? You know, what's the NP order or S types, P types that go into the FMAs of that type of system into the basic integers. And that'll be a word we say in a second here. And there'll be a few other ones we'll bring in this out. That's super important to those types of integers on the calculus of the mass, spin, direction, and so on and so forth. That gets us into this graduated cylinder experiment. This ball and water, ball and air, ball and water, ball and acid. But on the moment here, I would like to take.
That I should stop probing the secrets. Sorry?
Coming for you, Parasite.
Change the subject, yes. Well, I should explain.
Well, guess who that kid was?
About twisters, as perhaps you can see. I hope it's all right to pay my respects to Jörg for his.
Now, how would it work? Does it work this way? Does it work this way? Which science, what course are we working? In terms of, again,
not his necessarily.
The bottom of this
it has in
clink in the bucket, or are we?
Theory, as was just mentioned, is the connection
to the spin mass direction. I know it's horrible. Obviously, this is a bit better for the integers in that form.
There's a little connection with
given
networks, as loop quantum gravity does with the original aims of spin network theory, which was to
given
a combinatorial
some of the works that you'll need inside here, the way this describes through.
and calculate everything from it.
Here you'll see some of the nature of
Away from that.
Bernoulli.
I
Let's
don't know
assume.
whether we're coming to it,
Here we
back
have
to it
a,
or
well,
not.
we want to start on this side. Here
I
we have just some
sometimes
pipe
hope so.
works, the congruent
The connection
natures
here
of those
is that
things in
I was looking
position
at SU2 and its
on the system
representations, and I wanted
of
to do
different
something more
variations of some of the water hammer
relativistic
that you'll get into
in
ripping off the
space
roof
time, apart from directions, comes into it. And
into
twistor
some of these
theory
decision-making
basically
processes
looking at
dealing
SU2
with
rather
the
than SU2. The problem is
SU2,
that the
a more of a
representations
physical
that one's
OP
interested
brief
in are
in X
continuous
form,
and not
right?
discrete,
Because
and
that's
so
what
it
this
doesn't
would be in
seem very obvious
G22,
that one has to do with combinatorial
or
notion. Anyway, let
SQ22.
me explain
Some of the
very basic
axions,
ideas about
natures
twistor
inside
theory
here,
because
you
I
know,
like
it's
to
just a
assume that
fundamental
people are not
practice of trying to
experts
deal
here.
with the basic
And the
geometry
interesting part, as
of
far as I'm concerned, comes in at the end when the lightning flash will come down and
twistor theory.
prevent me from continuing. But we'll see what happens. Should be exciting if it does. Anyway,
Mario's Princess Peach's
I should
pearl
explain
necklace
that
here,
twistor
in
theory
terms of what twistor
is
theory becomes later in this diagram of
aimed at not
what he would say,
It's not a theory
maybe
which
not
you
to
would think of
compress
quantizing
this
eventually or something
information
like that.
in such a
It's
way,
somehow
or
illustrating
how to
connection
utilize the illustration of the board
relativity and
presentation in
quantum
this
mechanics.
form. Way
And
ahead of
you
you,
see this later
Pendro.
on,
Way out
where
for
it isn't
but I couldn't
something
do it
where you
without
can
this
quite
work.
see where the moment is,
At least
quantum
the
mechanics comes in
described
or something
nature
like
of what
that.
we can
It's
observe the
already
universe to be,
been
light
mixed up
passing in
together.
before I'd see
And they're
another
mixed up
star,
together right at the
or the
beginning,
expansion on those
because
things, keep the
The motivations, well, I
elements.
have a picture, roughly speaking, of what's going on of the twister. So we have
Bring
here
this
a
Ouija board
light
out to,
ray,
because I
and
pass
it's
through
basically
walls.
a theory where the light rays are represented by points. And the thing is that what are the points
That's what I
represented
thought
by
your
here?
mass
When
gap
you see
is
the
right.
space of light rays through a point is a sphere, and it's naturally a Riemann sphere. So the structure of that sphere
These gambits on
is,
these moves, 10 to the
by complex numbers with
120th,
points infinity adjoined,
are
so you have a
basically
sphere with a
the
conformal
periodic
structure.
table by bonds and
And,
compositions of
here you
certain
imagine that
atmospheres
you
of
have had
different
4
Schrödinger
stars you're
ways
looking
to
at this
value
point here,
those
intersecting the light
integers
cone,
based
and they would
on
be
these
represented
systems
by
that
4
work the
points.
same way but
Let's
apply
suppose they lie on
X.
a circle
But I
by
actually
chance.
need
Now, if you have another
some
observer
form
whizzing
of
past
that
at great
gambit
speed relative to the first one,
inside
the
here.
point is it's still a circle. So the transformation sends circles to circles, it's conformal, and
What's
therefore
worse?
well understood as a Riemann sphere. So here we see one rule
here we're
for the Riemann
closing off
sphere,
on
which is
Twister.
relativity, and
We do this
I don't
right
know if I
here.
can make this machine work.
Here we're
Here we
closing
go.
off on
Here we
Twister.
have another
To some of the
fundamental
things you'll
rule
see
for the
for
Riemann sphere,
integers
also
as he
to do
brings
with the
them back
directions in space.
from steps
If we consider a two-state
inside this
system,
value.
most particularly where
And
the
not only that,
two-state
I could
system
use
is
this to then set up
a,
15 minutes on 15 minutes for
spin
combatives
half
about
particle,
land nav,
and we have
your
spin up
brain
and
on
spin
field
down,
theory,
and the different
OP brief
combinations of
about
spin in
your
some other
spin,
direction.
your
So again, we
mass,
have naturally a
how much
Riemann
gold
sphere
that's worth, how
representing
much
directions
metaphysical
for different
Pensrow that
subjects. This is
slides
quantum
through
mechanics,
to
the
what
other
your
was
north
to do with
is on
relativity.
calculus,
So we see
and
that
you would
this
want to use
link
that as
between
well,
the two
right? Because it would
subjects
dictate
is
me
already
being
there at the
patent
beginning.
doing that direction for you.
Now, I hope I can remember
You
what's
know,
on
and
the
then
next slide.
you give me one of
That's not it.
these that's equal to
Another
one of
thing about the
these,
Riemann
but is
sphere,
actually
which
equal to
also
this. Yeah, all right,
fundamental to
okay.
the origins of
And then you get
twistor
both
theory
of them. Here,
is
obviously,
this
the Corey,
idea
or the
of
inside of the
splitting
mill, which is
your
all of this. It
amplitude
could be
into
both of
positive
this.
and
But then there's
negative
the Corey
frequencies.
diagram on one
Something
page
that was
with it as well.
emphasized to me when I was
Instead of
in
just the-
Syracuse in, I think, 1961, and I shared an office
Instead of
with
just the
Engelbert
overhead
Schumann,
on
and he made this
any
point
one of
that
those
the keys to
values
quantum field
across the
theory
board,
is that have
you
to
might
switch
have
your
a
amplitudes
different
into positive and negative
index
frequencies. And I like to think
of
about
how
this not
that
in
mechanic
terms of
works, or from that angle
Fourier
doing a very
analysis,
specific
particularly because
task
if you're in general
differently.
relativity, you're unlikely
Now,
to
they're not
have
too
a
far
way of
off,
splitting things into your Fourier components,
given that
but that's
compressed
not what you
state
want to
now,
do
or
if you
program.
simply want to know which is the positive and negative splitting.
And that's going to
And
be
the
using
nicest
this
way of
math.
doing
This
that
math
is
is
to
good for
imagine
that,
the
but it
Riemann
becomes
sphere
a
again,
base. And
and you're thinking of
it's great to
functions
study
which are
it, try to
defined
figure out what's going
on
on, because it gives you
real
good
axis, which I
form
thought
in
was the
diagrams,
equator,
if you
real
will.
axis together
Back
with
to,
infinity.
you know, some of the things we'll need here are changing that. Looking at that from a different index of what may be happening inside of there to forward CPT paradox, or CP1, CP, NP, or PNCP, the variance on the NP problem, or N versus NP problem, that describes it using the physics of elements. All of them would do a hydrogen to 118 exotic matters in the pipes, but they wouldn't naturally exist in gravity. But because of the shell count, we're talking about ions in the atmosphere that keep things in the pipes for their natural stabilization. You would say things like Teflon for fluoroantimonium acid is the only kind of thing, because eventually it'll dissolve glass. Just kind of wild. It'll help you get into some of these wave functions and vibrations at Maxwell and Rayleigh. What I need it to be, the acid in general, for timelines and systems where it starts to slide through, is I can still use room temperature sulfuric acid. It's just going to stretch out what the physics really is for the T numbers of that infrastructure while planning when my next step will be, or where the pressure and those other things come from, some heat in the process, a drop in Tylenol to aspirin or aspirin to Tylenol, where you'd lose it in these steps. You wouldn't notice a change in field some way, or a vibration change that changed your general calc that pegs off on something in that spot, because it dumps it all there as a coping mechanism or a renormalization equation. And you would say you would visually, on positive or negative, whichever variant you're looking for in there, to the what did I call this here? I called this the Higgs field. That's just you standing in there with Higgs, right? And you have to do math. Okay, look inside of here. Some of these standards of what this calculus represents in A-level physics, Fermi-Dirac and Einstein, statistical base introduction here is going to start to get you into some things that start to slide a little bit into computer engineering, a pin chip configuration, but also the chemistry of the NP order of, I have to use silica at those speeds and feeds, because otherwise these limitless natures of things at zeta close to 0, close to 1, I could use the stone mill to make it look like hydrogen, but the answers are going to be in 0 fields. It's going to be schematical designs and maybe integers in the write-out. Or I could be talking about hydrogen as this, whatever element I need in the stone mill. I need to make a fire gas thing. And so Hindenburg. So inside of here, that helped me with some of those NP orders and S orders or compositions of what helps me, lighter gas and picking up a lead balloon. Not a lot here to help you actually do any kind of math or change out the equation base to Bernoulli. And again, this makes this a vacuum. This diagram is about as far as this goes. I don't need tachyons. I don't need new shit on LEGO. I don't need new infram unless it's directly responsible to those other depicted diagrams to Hubble's deep field and lensing, and some of the things that might be a persistent problem in some of the infinities. Some of the infinities that might be prevalent in some of that systematical models, or the way you would deal with that cyclical transitory being equal to something else that is an integer by the other side, to say, well, what it is the optics of the black hole out there, which is Sagittarius A star. But what it really is,